If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button as well as the bell to be notified of future videos. Thank you.
Hello Internet, we are back. We're carrying on with the Air Force. You are most welcome here. It is Jacques du Toit, ex-captain of the Air Force. Last week we spoke about how it started for him, national service, park handler, and then he decided he's going to go into the Air Force. He's going to become an air crew member, and he got involved in all sorts of things. There's a lot of things we don't even telling you on the request from certain people. I'm sure you understand why. So, very welcome. Thank you once again. Can you carry on for us where you now join the Air Force and what happened further as a permanent member?
Hi, Chris. Sure. So we ended up. The story last time was me completing my 2 years national service, and really remember it as a great time in my life. Had a great time. Really enjoyed it. Met some really awesome people, and I was glad that I could do it. But at that stage, I was seriously starting to think of what am I going to do next, and I was very keen to stay in the Air Force, but not just for the sake of being there. I had to do something that I would be really interested in and that I would really believe in and really could make a difference. And one of my friends at that stage, who I met with, I did basics with, and the dog handlers course with at Hoedspruit, he was placed out at Air Force Base Waterkloof, and through some friends of his, he got introduced to electronic warfare and becoming an air crew member on the electronic warfare aircraft of the Air Force. And every time that I had a week off, a pass from national service and went back home, I would catch up with Wynand, and he would share with me what they were doing. And he has since then already joined permanent force, and he was now doing the electronic warfare course in the Air Force. The more he told me about this, the more excited I became about this. And I would go to the library and get some books on electronic warfare. What is this thing about? Because, is this black art and that no one knows about and so on. Anyway, so in order to be trained as an electronics operator, you had to join Air Force intelligence. Now, some people may not know this, but arm of the Defence Force is structured along 5 main lines. Army is very similar. So your in the case of the Air Force, Air Staff 1 is personnel. So everyone in the Air Force who does anything with people or HR type of things or administration would be an Air Staff 1. The next one is intelligence. So Air Staff 2 is intelligence. Air Staff 3 is operations. So all pilots, navigators, air traffic controllers, air defense, ops officers would fall under Air Staff 3. I think 4 was finance and 5 was logistics, or maybe the other way around. There was later a 6th one added, and that was for strategic planning. But in order to, so normally you would think that if you want to fly, you had to be an Air Staff 3 in operations, but because of the specialist area of electronic warfare, it was placed with intelligence. So you had to join in Air Force intelligence and then apply to become an electronics operator, and then go through the selection and then become, do the courses and then fly in the Air Force. And that's basically the route I did. So I think it was the 3rd of January 1990, I arrived at Air Force HQ, and to start my career in Air Force intelligence. And a couple of days later, I was placed out to Air Force Base Hoedspruit. So I went back to Hoedspruit, but now this time to base intelligence. Now, Hoedspruit, for those people who don't know, is at that stage, the base was about 10 years old and was built on the Israeli model for an operational base. So the runway was quite long. It was 4 kilometers long, and it was one of the official diversion airfields for the space shuttle at some stage. And if you look at it, if you go to something like Google Earth and you look at Hoedspruit, it's now a civilian airfield, but you would see that the taxiways are at an angle to the runway. They're called fast taxiways, so fighter aircraft can quickly get on the runway and take off from both ends. And the aircraft, the squadrons, the 1 and 2 squadron, the fighter squadrons, were actually, the aircraft were in hardened revetments. They were underground under concrete revetments. And even the helicopter squadron, the hangars also had a protected roof over the hangars to protect it from things like mortar attacks or similar attacks. So it was a real operational base. A lot of things were hidden. A lot of things were redundant. There were 2 of each thing, so that the base, every area had 2 roads going to it. So if one get bombed out, you know, you could use the other one. So it was a really interesting place to start your career. And Air Force intelligence was underground. There was a couple of stories underground. It was to the side of the main operations center of the base that controlled all flight operations in the base. I arrived there, and the base intelligence officer was a Major Will Mackey. Now, later what I learned was that he was one of the Air Force intelligence officers during operations Modular, Hooper, and Packer. And, you know, it was probably one of the biggest, you know, pieces of luck I've had in my career to end up with Major Will Mackey, because he had this in-depth experience of the Bush War. He knew everything there was to know about Air Force intelligence, and you know, we walk in there, a couple of us, we had no idea, and he started to immediately invest a lot of time in us and our training to be able to be productive members of that base intelligence team. So he would give us all sorts of training that he knew that we would later have to do in our Air Force intelligence careers. So, you know, we learned about public speaking and giving an intelligence briefing and how to do the analysis of a weapon system and map reading and all sorts of things like that. He really, every single day, we would do training, and he would also augment this training with his personal experience on the border of all the things he did there and how they did it, and you know how the intelligence processes work. So that was really fortunate, because early in 1990, just after getting to Spruit, I was sent to go do my A-level intelligence course. There was now A-level was like the introduction to the basics of Air Force intelligence. So what is Air Force intelligence about? The intelligence cycle, you know, and it covered all the basic things that Will Mackey was teaching us, like giving presentations, map reading, and so on. We even had a bit of a bush phase as well, a couple of days, just to orientate us to, you know, how you operate with a mobile air operations team, you know. So we did this A-level course and came back. But from the moment that I arrived in Spruit, I made it very clear that I'm there till the next electronic warfare course starts at Air Force Base Waterkloof. And he was very happy with that. So by the time that, so also another very interesting thing, the one day, it was the 2nd of February 1990, I was down in the base intelligence, and I had to go get something across the corridor in the operations center. And in the operations center, that big whiteboard with all the flights for the day, there was a big TV on the one corner, and there was the opening of Parliament. And President F.W. de Klerk was on the TV, and I think the ops officer at that stage was a Major Potgieter. He used to stand there with his cigarette, one foot on the chair, and he would watch the TV and, you know, listen to this. And he almost like stopped me, because, you know, he wanted to listen to what President de Klerk was saying. And, you know, I heard it. He was saying that the ANC will be unbanned and Nelson Mandela would be released from prison. And now this is the 2nd of February, 1990. Okay? And I turned to Major Potgieter and I said, "Who is Nelson Mandela?" I didn't know. I honestly did not know who Nelson Mandela was. And later, and he just looked at me funny, and he went on, you know, watching the opening of Parliament. It was quite an important point in South Africa's history, that moment. But for me also personally, and I went back to the intelligence officers there underground, and I spoke to Major Mack, and I said, I just heard that they just announced that ANC will be unbanned and Nelson Mandela would be released. Who is Nelson Mandela? And he didn't explain to us the history of, you know, the Rivonia trials and where Nelson Mandela came from, and that whole story. And then for the first time, you know, the few of us that was quite young at that stage, I was 20 years old, got exposed to, you know, that part of the history from South Africa that we didn't know about. And that was quite significant. So ultimately, in May 1990, we heard that they were starting up the next electronic warfare course, and you know, I could now apply for that, and I was soon off to Air Force Base Waterkloof to go and do the training. So we arrived at this building on the northeastern side of Air Force Base Waterkloof called Geelvis. In Afrikaans is the Gesamentlike Lugverkenning Inligtingcentrum, and in English is JARIC, Joint Air Reconnaissance Intelligence Center. And that name didn't mean much to me at that stage of my life, but anyway, this is the place where we're going to learn all about electronic warfare. And so we were, I think, initially 12 guys who arrived on day one, and you know, we started the course. And the course had three phases. It had firstly electronic warfare phase, where we learned the basics of electronics. And it was like an electronics 101 course, antenna theory, how does radios work, radar. We had a lot of mathematical calculations to do to work out decibels and things like that, and watts and then outputs and so on and so on. And we were given the theory of electronic warfare basically in the first phase of that. The next phase was then a ground phase. And let me just explain a bit of the context where this course came from. During the border war, a lot of the successes that the South African Defence Force had was built on this concept of command and control and intelligence. So with very few resources, very few people at one stage, if you had all of those things coordinated and aligned, you don't have to have a huge force to fight a war. And as part of that, you had to absolutely be on top of your intelligence game, and you had to have the essential bits of intelligence available at the right time to make the right calls, to have your resources in the right place so that you can actually properly fight the war. And part of this, the methodology was that, or the thinking, the philosophy was that critical to a war is the ability to get air superiority very early on. And for that, you needed to know where the aircrafts of your enemy and the radars and the missile systems, all of that were. And you need to know if they were using them and how they were using them and when they were using them. It was very important. So that came down to MiGs in Angola. When they take off, you absolutely have to know exactly when they were taking off, so that you could warn your forces, or you could react to that, or you could, you know, align all your resources to be able to do something about that. And as part of that, the idea was that the Russian doctrine was, when a MiG takes off, it does a quick test of the radar, switches it on for a moment and switches it off again, and it tests its radios, and then it's radio silent all the way then to the target. Not to give its burst away. So the idea is that if you could get on the ground very close to that base with the right electronic equipment, you could pick up those initial test signals and then radio that back to through the command and control network to say MiGs on their way. Yeah, that was the whole philosophy that the training was built around. So this ground phase, the second phase of the electronic warfare course, was to give us the ability to operate with special forces, to be able to be the electronic specialists with the special forces guys, to be able to pick up those type of signals in any future war that was going to happen. So that was great fun. So for a month, we went back to Air Force Regiment in Hoofspreid, which I knew very well by then. Some of the guys from the electronic warfare unit within Jarek actually presented the course. I think it was Donovan Krokamp and Johan Porfiter. They presented an awesome course for a month, and they really did a lot of good work to put it together for us. And so we would get a lot of lectures in the day, but the whole thing was you had to operate in the bush. You had to operate and know how to do that in the bush and that. So we had lectures every day, and every night we had to sleep in foxholes. You had to you go into a temporary base and you set up, you get taught how to operate and go into a temporary base and how to walk patrol and all these things, and all your procedures that an infantry team would do. But there was a very limited time. You had to fit in a lot of things in a month. But every night we used to sleep in a foxhole. So you had to dig a foxhole about your hip depth, and you had to sleep in that foxhole. You couldn't sleep on top of the ground. You had to sleep inside the foxhole. And I remember almost every time when I woke up the next morning, there were scorpions in my foxhole, but no one else's foxhole. For some reason, the scorpions just loved me. Then you had to walk about 2 kilometers in a patrol format. We had R5s with us and all our equipment with us, and we had to walk to a little lapa that they had next to one of the dry river beds there at the back of the Air Force Regiment, and then we would get our lectures in the day, and then we would in the evening, then when we finished, walk back, and you have to walk patrols, and the people presenting the course may wait for us and lie, and so you couldn't just walk. You had to walk properly quiet, and you were to do this properly. And then going to a temporary base again, and then you were lucky if you were going to the same base again. You didn't have to dig foxholes again. But every couple of days we would move that TB around, and we had to dig new foxholes. Anyway, so one of the most fascinating pieces of training I've ever had in my Air Force career happened during that course, that ground phase. So we had to learn the basic 101 of escape and evasion as soon as possible. And for that, they had a guy that they brought out from Special Forces. He was Special Forces, but he didn't have an operator's badge. He was a tracker, expert at tracking, let's call it that. But he was on seconded duty. He was actually at Bergslak at the dog school at that stage. But they brought him back just to come and present this anti-tracking course to us. And this guy was bold. He was strong. You could see that he was probably an Angolan that came from that part of the world. He was very strong. He looked like he was the guy who used to carry the mag. He was like a really strong arms. But he wasn't great with his verbal ability to communicate things and teach things, but he decided he's going to show us. So he took the 12 of us and he said, okay, this is how you would walk in the bush. And this is how, so he taught us the basic 101 of tracking and anti-tracking for the next 4 hours. And we were just astounded at the things that he was showing us. What do you do if people are chasing you and you need to get away? How do you get off the track as soon as possible? He was teaching us 5 or 6 things and how you would do that. By actually showing it and doing it. He said, so if you come across a spoor, a set of tracks in a path, how do you know how many people are in that spoor? How many people, is it 2 guys or 6 guys or 14 guys? How do you know? And he showed us how you calculate how many people are behind you if you had to be in that situation. And he showed us all these, what I would call very advanced techniques on how to get away if you really have someone behind you. How would you get away from them? So if you had a good tracker, you would just make that tracker's work a bit harder. You probably wouldn't get away from him, but it would buy you enough time to get away. And we had to know this because if you were going to operate with special forces in a situation like that, you had to be able to at least have the basics and understand how they were doing that. And that was an amazing 4 hours, looking at what this guy did. And after that, I think all of us, the way that we operated completely changed. Our tracking and anti-tracking, we were starting to practice over the next few weeks what he taught us in those 4 hours. And it was just one of those amazing learning experiences that you didn't expect you would get. But how the ground phase was shaped is that you would get lectures through the week, and then every weekend that we were there at Hoedspruit, we would get a special assignment for the weekend. And that assignment was that they would take us to a new place that we haven't been before. And that was somewhere between Phalaborwa, Hoedspruit, and the Kruger National Park, that area. We didn't know where we were going. And they would drop us off somewhere, and then they would give us a map to, we had to walk into a place and take up a temporary base. And then we, for that weekend, had to observe that place and write a report of what we saw over the weekend that happened there. So the first one was quite easy. It was within the Hoedspruit Nature Reserve around the airbase. And the next one was a bit harder, but the one I wanted to tell you about was in the last weekend. The last test we had was quite a tough one. So they gave us a map and they took us to a game reserve next to the Kruger National Park. And they dropped us off about 4 kilometers in a dry riverbed. There was the LZ. And then we had to walk to these 3 positions. We were divided up in 3 little groups of 4 each. And we had different areas to go to. They were about half a kilometer from each other along a fence. And we all were watching the same area on the other side of this fence. And we had to, for 4 days now, observe this place. And the idea was not to get caught. So there was a lot of locals working there and living there that was not supposed to know that we are there for the 4 days. That was basically the idea, that you could now integrate all the skills that you were taught over that past month. So we did that, and we took up these positions, and we were there for the 4 days. And I remember we were on the southern side of this. It was like a bush lodge with an airfield that we were watching and writing this report on. And the 4 of us went into long grass, and we set up, our temporary base there. And one by one, there was a huge baobab tree. And we couldn't really see from where we were on the ground level, the area that we had to watch. So we decided we would one by one go for 2 hours in the tree with the binoculars and then watch this area over the fence. And then every 2 hours we would change. Somebody would come down and the next guy will come up. And that's how we would do the 4 days. So I just came down the tree on my first 2 hours. And it was about 4 o'clock in the afternoon it was a Monday afternoon. And went into my, the place where I was now hiding there in the long grass, and we wouldn't really talk to each other. It was like whisper, because you would never know when one of these locals would come around, they walk down the road or come past us. So we absolutely had to lie still there for 4 days. The next minute, I hear this noise. Okay? But it's one of those sounds that you never forget in your life. And it's a roar of a lion. Okay? But he wasn't close. He was still kilometers away. He was probably 5 or 7 kilometers away, but you could hear this was a big boy, and he was making a big noise. So the guy in the tree, I could see he start looking in that direction with the binoculars. And after a while, he came down and he said, "There's a lion, a couple of kilometers from us. There's a big herd of buffalo that came past. And this lion is following the buffalo. There's about 300 buffalo in his herd, and he's walking behind them. He's probably very hungry or angry or whatever. He's a loner, and he's now following these buffalo, waiting for his next meal. But then the buffalo stopped. And now this lion was there near us somewhere, and we didn't know where he was. So every now and then he would just give this big, loud, deep roar, and it make you sit up immediately and say, where the hell is this lion? Long story short is that when the sun started setting, we decided, no, there's no ways we're going to spend the night under this tree with the lion. So we all got into the tree as soon as the sun set. And we radioed in that we had a lion problem, and said, no, just, stay in the tree and, you should be safe. But this lion had other plans. He started walking around the tree. In the darkness, we couldn't really see him. You would hear him walk around the grass and sticks breaking and so on. And every now and then he would give this roar, but, So at one stage we radioed back to the controllers, and we said, this lion is not going away. He's here for the night. And I said, okay, if he becomes afraid, you got permission to shoot him. But no one really wanted to shoot a lion. And anyway, I don't think you're going to try your luck with an R5 on a lion. It's not going to end well for either one of you. So we just stayed in the tree, and we slept there the whole night. And we just made sure anyone didn't fall asleep and fall out of the tree, because that would not be funny. And this lion, just the whole night, every now and then he would disappear and go quiet, and the next moment he would be back again, and he would give this loud roar that sound goes right through your chest. It's just one of those awesome things. Anyway, so the whole time that he was around us, we never saw him. Okay, but early the next morning we got a glimpse of him, and he was huge. He was one of the biggest lions I've seen in my life. Anyway, so by midday he was still around there, and he was angry. He was breaking some trees down there for some reason. You could see this guy was not happy. But late on that Tuesday afternoon, the herd of buffalo now started moving away again, and he was now following them again, and he started moving around. And then finally we could get out of the tree again and continue with the exercise. So that was quite an experience with the lion. We didn't bargain on that. Now that I remember, the farm was called Giraffe Farm, near the Timbavati Nature Reserve. So we were glad we didn't have to shoot the lion, but we were more glad that he didn't try and have one of us for his breakfast. So that ended pretty well.
Now I have to ask you, Jacques, if you get a call of nature wearing the tree, man, what do you do?
I don't think anyone had, because I think you were too scared to do anything there. So you had to just wait until it was all clear and the lion had moved on. But luckily we could see him move on, and he was then gone, and that was fun, and we could go on. But in this exercise, I think the other two groups at different stages of the 4 days got compromised in some way. But we were the only group that were not compromised. I think the one group, the guys were sitting there, and the next minute a snake fell out of the tree amongst them, and they just scattered. It was a non-venomous snake, but when a snake falls on your lap, you don't ask it for identification. You just run. So unfortunately, they were compromised. The other group, they saw that next to this building that they were watching, there was a water tap on the wall, and they wanted to fill up all their water bottles. So in the day they looked, and there was no dogs around, so that they were going to climb over the fence, and two guys, and fill up their water bottles. The one would keep watch, and the other one would fill the water bottles, and so that's what they did. So just after sundown, there was nobody around. They over the fence, and while the one guy is filling the water bottle, the other guy is starting to talk to something there, nibbling at his pants. And he said, what are you doing? He says, no, I'm just playing with the dog here. He says, but there are no dogs here. We checked. He confirmed there's no dogs. And the guy looked again. He said, oh, no, it's not a dog. It's a rhino calf. And the other guy said, but if there's a rhino calf, it probably has got a mother. Have you thought about that? And the two of them just ran through the water bottles over the fence, and jumped over the fence. because the mother was in fact there, but it wasn't very close. But that could have been a very different situation for them. But so we had some real interesting experiences there. But I remember also one of the requirements of that training was that because of the sophisticated electronic equipment that we were developing at that stage, if you had to leave everything behind, you also had to have the ability to destroy it. And so we were also taught with not explosives, but white phos hand grenades. So we had to be able to operate them. And that was an interesting experience because the first hour and a half of that training was talking about the dangers and how dangerous it is. And, these are not toys, and, all the inherent dangers of using white phos, and so you were really scared by the time you got to the point where you now had the opportunity to actually throw a grenade or two as part of the training. So I think at the end of the day, only two of us, decided, okay, we'll have a go at this, and we threw some white phos grenades there. And I remember a couple of days later, we had to go back to the site and rake the ground, so make sure that some of the phosphor didn't get stuck, and because phosphor keep on burning, if the moment the dust goes off it starts burning again. That was also quite an interesting experience, and how people were processing this use of the white phos hand grenades at that stage. So we ended up completing the bush phase, so-called. It was great fun. We also had some weapons training in that. And now we were on our way back to Waterkloof again to go and do now the flying phase of our electronic warfare course. Okay. So we did the theory bit, and we had to do like weather and navigation and airmanship and things like that, because you were now going to become aircrew and fly as aircrew on Air Force planes. So you had to be fully proficient in doing that. And so our wing was, and I'll send you a picture of the wing. It says EO, electronics operator. And I think in NATO, the convention at that stage was that electronic warfare was EW, but for some reason they decided EO is more generic, and no one would ask silly questions if they see an EO rather than an EW wing. So we had an EO wing. You could only attain that wing after 100 hours. So you had to fly, learn the equipment, and go through the course. And you had to build up then after that your hours to 100. And then when you get to 100, the Air Force would then, or the squadron where you were flying, would then make sure that you get onto the next wings parade to get a wing, your operator's wing. So we were trained on the DC-4s. We had two DC-4s, 6901 and 6906. Those were the two DC-4s, and they were equipped with, so for more electronic support measure role, not a strategic intelligence gathering role. So they were there to support operations. And we were trained on the equipment inside. We spent a lot of hours in the back of the aircraft on the ground to learn how to operate these equipment. And then finally we started flying, and we had to, each one of us had a one-on-one instructor with us in the plane that taught us how to, all the airmanship side of flying, but also how to operate all the equipment and how to operate as an air crew and the language you would use as an air crew and so on. And that was great fun. But there was one of the guys, was a great friend of mine, who really struggled with air sickness. So the moment we started flying, every single time, you would just start on the equipment, switch on and go through the setup process, and then he would get airsick. And he got really airsick. And I think at one stage we called him Catman, shooting all the cats. So he was, but this was not really funny, because he was getting to a point where he may be thrown off the course for not being able to handle the motion sickness. So at one stage we said, okay, now we need to do something about this. So we asked the squadron, and they got a doctor from the Institute for Aviation Medicine, where we did our air crew medicals every year. They were based in Centurion, we've got a doctor out to come give us a lecture on air sickness and how to prevent it and what to do to prevent air sickness. So he said to us two things. He said air sickness can be prevented by firstly making sure that you have a proper meal before you fly. Okay, so he said don't ever fly on an empty stomach. He says that's the first thing. He says because when you fly and you lose your orientation with the horizon, your body secretes a hormone that goes to your stomach to say there's poison, get rid of it, and that's the reflex that then makes you vomit. So if you've got food in there, it helps to absorb that hormone so you don't get sick. He said the second thing is that you've got to do is you've got to look out at the horizon, not the control surfaces of the plane. Says what your mind, what your middle ear is telling you and what you're seeing in the plane is two different things. But if you look out far at the horizon, you'd be fine because that is the true, where the real horizon is. Your brain will then make a computation and you would not get sick. So Jan took this advice very seriously, and for the next flight, he decided he's going to have a proper meal before we take off. So we get into the back of the DC-4, and he takes out 2 tins of canned fish. That was going to be his meal for the day. And I said, and then soon he realized that was a big mistake because that all came out again. But luckily, later he rather got a hamburger or something, and then he was fine again, and he could carry on with the course and finish the course with us. But after that, we had to wait now for opportunities to fly and to build up your hours. And that in itself was just a waiting game. You had to wait for the opportunity to come up. And I suppose I got lucky at that stage. There was a tasking that we received that meant that you had to fly for a whole month. We would go to one of the other air bases in the country, and we had a specific target that we could only access by sea. As much as I can say about that. And we would fly 2 sorties, one in the morning and one in the afternoon with the DC-4. And we would fly up and down this place on the coast, and for a month long monitor this place. And I was the only guy who was on all the flights. So I made up my 100 hours within a month. So I was the first guy to have enough hours to actually qualify as an operator at the time. But over time, all of us actually got our hours, and we finally had a wing spray, and we got our wings and we could start flying. But so that was the start of my flying career. And later on, I did the Boeing course, and I started flying on the Boeing, and I'll tell you some more about that a bit later. And also in the electronic warfare community, the Air Force had airborne jammers that went in the back on a pallet in the back of the Oryx helicopter. And I did a lot of the test flying on the Oryx based jammers. Although we never were seen as official air crew on the Oryx, we did a lot of test flying with them and used the jammers with them. So if you got up to 500 hours, which took forever, you got your silver badge. And I think there was a level of 1,500 hours for a golden badge, but I don't think anyone in my lifetime at that time when I was in the Air Force actually qualified for the golden wings. There was a couple of us who got to silver wings at that time. But also in that time, we were now in a unit within JARIC that was the other half of JARIC, which was the signal intelligence and electronic warfare team. And we started doing all sorts of other deployments as part of the ground bit of electronic warfare. And there was a few of us who did tours to Walters Bay, to Rooikop. The Army had a station there that we used to do 6-week tours at to look at the Air Force side of the communication intelligence. In that phase of late 1990 to 91, all these new guys now that were qualified electronic warfare operators, we were now also doing some other work as well, and we were sent to work with the Army on a few of the communication intelligence sites. So I did a tour to Rooikop, I think it was 513 Troop was one of the army stations there. It was in the barracks and the facilities that used to be part of 61 Mech in Walvis Bay, right there to the south of Rooikop itself. So I spent 6 weeks of my life there, and what I remember from that time is that every time we went to town, to Walvis Bay itself, there was one of the Navy vessels like the SAS Drakensberg or the Tafelberg, and they were uploading all the Rattles and the G5s, the last that were still in Walvis Bay, before Walvis Bay was going to be given back to Namibia. So, you know, you would see all this equipment all cleaned and ready and being uploaded to go back to South Africa. So I did a tour there. Also, two of us were sent to Palabova to, there was one of these stations very close to 5 Recce at that stage. So I remember the first day we arrived there in our blue uniform, and, you know, we were shown the setup there in this unit there in Palabova. And over lunchtime, I could go back to the bungalow where the two of us, me and this one officer, Brett Pretorius, were staying. And, you know, it was just like 12:30, just lying down, taking a rest in the middle of the day. And the next moment, I hear this loud bang, this explosion, but it's like it's outside the building right here. You know, immediately rolled off the bed, and I was now waiting for what the hell is next, because the windows were shaking, and what the hell was this now? And after a few minutes, somebody came in, they opened the door, and I said, no, it's all fine, I can come out. And what it turned out is that it was some of these guys from 5 Recce were in the area, and they were practicing building clearance in the building right next door to me, but no one bothered to tell me that this was going to happen. So there's all these explosions going off, which was great fun. But really enjoyed working with the Army guys. They really appreciated it. They were people with the same interest in the same subject matter as them, and they really treated us very well at all these bases. So Brett and I had a great experience there. But what we learned is that there was a great opportunity on the Mozambican border to go in and learn more about the communication setups there that we could use for training purposes in future. So that kicked off a whole lot of trips then over the next few years to Komati Poort in that area, and then I'll tell you some of the stories there in a moment. But at that time at Waterkloof, at Jarek, I worked with some really some legends in the Air Force, some really people who really framed up a lot of my career and the direction of my career at the time. So my boss at the time was a guy called Commandant Mossi Basson. Now, if you speak to any officer in the Air Force, they would know who he is. He's a legend. Okay, and he recently wrote his own book.
He wrote some book, didn't he?
Yes, he recently, I think last year in 2020, published his book on some of these experiences. And you know, he was just a legend in the Air Force, and really he was Mr. Electronic Warfare in my view in the Air Force at that stage. So I still have contact with him. His son John used to fly with me in the Air Force. His daughter was an air traffic controller in the Air Force, and she was good friends with my wife at the time. And his other son actually worked for me in the Air Force later on. So you know, it was I really knew that whole family quite well. And so Mossi Basson was really amazing. He was working with a Commandant Neil Napier, and unfortunately he's since passed on. But he was the navigator of the Buccaneer that on the 3rd of January 1988 launched the smart bomb against the breach at Quito. And Neil Napier was an amazing, brilliant man. He had a photographic memory. And I remember one of the things that was a trademark of Neil Napier is that he always, I don't know why, carried garlic with him, a bulb of garlic and a pocket knife in his pocket everywhere. So some people would even challenge him on Air Force parades and say, "Commandant, do you have any garlic on you?" And he would pull out a bulb of garlic and a pocket knife. He was really into his garlic. So yeah, so the other person there at Jarek at that time that was basically waiting to, who was like in between postings was Major Arthur Piercy. Now, he was disabled. He was in a wheelchair, and I think he still is today. So his story was he was a Mirage F1 pilot, and he got shot by a MiG-23 in the Bush War, where I think the missile went just past his tailpipe and blew out his drag chute and a lot of his hydraulics. And he made it back to Ondangwa, but unfortunately when he landed, he's got his whole story on the internet. If you can find it very easily there. But essentially what happened is plane ran off the end of the runway, the ejection seat went off, and those first versions of the Martin Baker ejection seat was not a 0-0 seat that could eject from the ground. So he broke his back, and he was paralyzed from there onwards. But he was a Jarek at that time, and worked with him for a while. There was another officer that worked for quite some time with us, Major Cole Falker. Now, he was a legend. You could probably write a book just about Cole Falker and his helicopter days in the Air Force. He came from that generation of helicopter pilots where every second one of them at least had a Norris Crooks. So they were legendary, that band of helicopter pilots. And I think some of that stories have already been published in a lot of books. But Cole Falker was one of those helicopter pilots that unfortunately he had an accident and his career was cut short, so he left the Air Force. But in that time when he was still waiting to get clarification of that, he was working with us in electronic warfare. So at that time, when I was working for Mosi Basson at Jarek, there was a couple of interesting stories I want to share with you that are not in his book. So the one was, I was still a corporal then. It was just before I did my officer's course. He said to me one day, so for the next week, I want you to be a babysitter. And I said, Commandant, what do you mean? He says, we are getting a guest, and you're going to be his babysitter for the next week. Now, I want you to get a vehicle for the week, because wherever this man want to go, you're going to take him, and you're going to make sure that we look after him for that week. So the next week, Mosi tells me, go to the one of the hotels there in Pretoria and go and pick up this guy called Larry Bennett. Okay, and I pull in there. I think it was the Mayor's Park Hotel in Pretoria, and go to reception, and I meet this tall American guy in a suit, and heavy American accent, and but very friendly and so on, and introduced myself to him, and so for the next week, I was basically a chauffeur for Larry Bennett. Okay, now Larry Bennett was in the Bush War. The South Africans captured one of the missile systems that we captured was the SAM-8. And Mosi was part of the process to evaluate, as part of his role in the Air Force. He was senior staff officer evaluation of this foreign technology. And he would contract organizations to do studies of these equipment. And then the SAM-8 was such a technical intelligence coup for South Africa that we could now start transacting with other countries and get stuff that we didn't have and swap it out and give them what we had on the SAM-8. And Larry Bennett was in South Africa for that week. So we would take him around to these companies who did the analysis, and he would actually go to the SAM-8 and we would put in the operation for him and show him how it works and so on. And he would then, work with these engineers to understand, everything and answer all his questions. But Larry Bennett's claim to fame was that he was the developer. He was an electronics engineer, and he was the developer of the proximity fuse in the front of the Patriot missile. Now, a proximity fuse, the function of that is that when it intercepts another missile or aircraft, it sends out a signal, and when it sees something else, it immediately explodes the warhead. And Larry Bennett was the guy who developed the proximity fuse system for the Patriot missile. So he was technically a very sharp guy, and for the week, I spent this whole week of my life with Larry Bennett, and listened to all his stories and what they were doing in America, and swap outs, things like that. But it was great to be exposed to someone like that. He was very friendly and very jovial and very sharing, and so we had a great time with him. The other story was at some stage after South Africa was now starting to be led back into the world, after the end of apartheid and the sanctions and so on, and a lot of doors were opening up for the military and for the Air Force. And through his connections, Mossy got a connection that he could go to Poland and buy a few missiles, the actual missiles that we could use for trials, or to look at some of the technical capabilities and specifications, and do stuff with it. So he came back one day. He went on a trip, and we didn't know where he was going, and then he came back, and the next minute, this plane lands at Waterkloof Air Force Base, and they offload all these crates. Yeah. And there was 3 or 4 different types of missiles there. I used to go with the guys, and we would unpack these things and start assemble it, because now some of the generals were starting to look at the stuff that Mossy was buying overseas, to look at it. And the one missile was a SAM-6 missile. It was a huge missile, and it came in this big grey crate. So the idea was that Somchem, which was one of the munitions affiliates of Arms Corps, was interested in the back section because it had a ramjet motor. So it had a solid fuel rocket, and when that burned out, it automatically became a ramjet. And it was one of the few working ramjets in the world and Somchem wanted to have a look at one of these. But the front bit was now the guidance side of the SAM-6 missile, and the Air Force was interested in that bit only. So Somchem said, "We'll buy the missile, but you've got to get it here, and so you can have the head for free, and we'll pay for the whole missile." And that was the deal that we made. Mossy came to me and he said, "You got a job. You got to get this missile down to Somchem in the Cape." Okay. And so I went back to the office, and I phoned one of my connections at Air Force headquarters, and I said, "Hey, I need to get an aircraft to take this missile down to the Cape." They said, "Yeah, sure. When you want it?" Says, "No, as soon as possible." And I found out that it's easier to task a airplane in the Air Force than to get a motor vehicle. It was really that easy. If you had the right reason, you could get aircraft very easily. So booked a C-130, and because it was a missile and it had explosives in it, they couldn't allow anything else or anyone else on the plane. It was just me and the missile, and we got in the back of the C-130 and flew down to Cape Town, to Eysterplaat. And then I had organized a truck and a forklift to unload this missile, put it on the truck so we could take it to Somchem in the Cape. And I remember landing there at Eysterplaat and getting off the Flossie, and all of a sudden this sedan car come driving up to me with normal Cape Town number plates. And the only people who drove those cars with unmarked or non-military plates was the guys from counter intelligence. Yeah. So this sergeant major came driving up to me, and he let the window go down, and he said, "Good morning, Corporal." I said, "Good morning, Sergeant Major." He whispered to me, there next to the C-130, he whispered to me, he said, "Are you the guy with the missile?" I said, and I looked left and right, I said, "Yes, I am the guy with the missile." He says, "Okay," and he drove off again. Anyway, long story, we got the missile on a truck and drove it down to Somchem, and took it to the guys who was going to receive it now, and I had to show them how to operate this Russian crate. It was very interesting. All the Russian missiles, all the control surfaces across the whole range at that stage, you could have an 8mm Allen key, and all the control surfaces would be able to be set up and put in place just with an 8mm Allen key. And apparently the Russian designers that way to make it that simple that everything works on the same Allen key, so you don't have to have different Allen keys. So I had to show them that, how to do that. And then I said, okay, that's my job done, but these guys just wouldn't let me go because they hardly ever get any visitors because of the type of secrecy of the things that they're working on. So they were only too glad to have someone there to show all their toys and the things they were working on and so on. So it was quite an experience to be taken through the manufacturing area and all the things that they were playing with and building. I remember one of the projects they showed me is that they had a big stainless steel lathe. This thing was probably at a bed of about 10 meters long. It was huge. And this was the lathe that they used to wind the fiberglass tubes that would be the solid fuel rocket section for the South African space program for the rockets, for the RSA-1 rocket. So they would have fiberglass feed that ran across this bed and build up the strength of this the side of this tube. And then they would cast the propellant into that, and that will be the rocket section then for these rockets. But obviously at that stage, no more rockets were being built and so on. So they just still had the lathe, and they had to find a purpose for this. And what they did is they started making drain pipes for the Italian government because they had a lot of regions where there were earthquakes. And these fiberglass pipes could take the bends in an earthquake. So they had this huge order for thousands of these drain pipes that they were making there at Somtium. It was quite interesting how they were diversifying to stay relevant during that time. They also worked with some of the ostrich farmers there in the Cape because they had quite a low success rate with incubating ostrich eggs. And they built a special ostrich egg incubator that would roll the eggs every now and then and so on and so on. And that lifted the success rate of successful chicks coming out of a hatch by more than 80%, which was a great leap forward in technology for these ostrich farmers. So they were getting into all sorts of little side projects like this. It was quite interesting. Any questions at this stage, Chris? I just want to check before I continue.
It seems to me that the Air Force is a very technical place. Not so much the Army, the Navy I still get to, I think very technical as well. So did you need any special kind of abilities, with maths and of science?
You're right. It's the environment lends itself to, to have a certain type of person that is really technically competent with, in a lot of different areas. And, to maintain an aircraft, you have avionics and radar and all sorts of, just the electronics bit to it, computers, building test equipments and things. It takes a type of person who's really have the aptitude for more technical things and understand those type of things. And that's why you attract people with those type of skills to an Air Force or to that environment. But with that also comes the requirement then to look after those people because of those technical skills. So, you could have the interest and attitude for it and be great at it. But if you put someone on a base where they're going to not get stimulated or not get the work, they're going to lose them. They're going to go somewhere else because their minds, they need to be busy, active, and working on interesting things all the time. So, my experience was we had a lot of great, technically competent people, and you had to have them because, if you think of a fighter aircraft in the air, to get that one plane in the air, you probably need about 75 other people in that pyramid behind that pilot to be able to get that plane to fly. And then that's a ratio of people. That's just how it works. That's the complexity of what you work. Now, for other weapon systems, that ratio may be a bit lower, but it's a system. It's a really integrated system, and you need people. Even the guy at the front gate, or the cook in the mess, all of those people contribute to that pyramid in some way or another to be able to get that one flying hour out of a fighter aircraft, or any plane for that matter. So it's a really integrated group of people working together to be able to. And often we just see the plane flying, and we think that's the Air Force, but the Air Force is those people behind in that system that make sure that all the components work to be able to have a safe flying hour out of that pilot.
So how high was the technical expertise to keep these aircraft going?
We had great people, great training, and we had great systems. So a lot of our guys also had international training, and a lot of them were heavily invested in to go and get that training and bring it back. And so there was ongoing competency testing on these guys. You just didn't leave someone. There was a high bar for safety. And also at some stage the Air Force got heavily involved in things like quality circles to make sure that the quality is built into the processes of maintaining aircraft. But I was less involved in the technical side of that, the maintenance side of that, the logistical technical side of that. So you probably have to look for someone who comes from that area, who is an aircraft maintenance specialist or a logistic officer or whatever on one of these squadrons, to give you a bit of an insight into what it takes to actually have a serviceable aircraft at the right time to be able to conduct operations, to turn it around as soon as possible. It's quite a investment to make to be able to get that. And some of the weapon systems, you actually want to build that redundancy or that quality into the weapon system, so you have less reliance on people that can fail in the process. But that's a design goal later in some of these systems. But our people were, in my experience, the people I worked with were excellent technically. They were extremely competent. They had a sense of responsibility. It was, if you look at a aircraft mechanic or avion radio specialist, it was his plane flying there, and he took responsibility for the systems on that plane flying. So there was a real pride in getting your aircraft and keep them serviceable at all the time.
Were these equipment, was they homegrown, or did they come from overseas, or which you were using on the Spook and places like that for Boeing?
The equipment was a bit of a mix. The equipment on Spook or 6901 was quite old. I think the technology for some of the equipment was dated back to the 50s and 60s. Is that I think some of that came from the Shackletons, but I speak on a correction there. But some of it was also locally developed. We had a couple of organizations as part of the defense industry in South Africa who were developing some really good equipment. And I think some of the ground equipment that we were using for radar analysis was leading edge at the time. Was really soldier-proof, technical equipment that worked every time you used it and needed almost no maintenance. There was some great organizations and companies in the industry that were providing this equipment. Some things, with the sanctions, you couldn't get hold of equipment, so you had to build something. But those things were more rare. Usually the equipment that you had had a technology baseline, and you just had to maintain that. And then there were some projects on the side to start replacing things and augment things as you went along. But thinking back, some of the equipment there was definitely a lot of German equipment. And I think some of the equipment was even legacy, older American equipment. There was in some of the planes. I don't know where it came from. I think that's maybe a story for someone else to tell. But the equipment we had to do the job, it was, more serviceable than unserviceable. It really was purpose-built for what we needed to use. The plane was hardly ever unserviceable because of our equipment. It was other technical things. If you work with a plane that was built in 1947, you can expect small other things and issues to occur with the plane from time to time. But we found that the more you flew, the less they broke. It's only when the plane was standing on the ground for 3 or 4 weeks for no apparent reason that things started breaking. It was almost like it was talking to say, hey, use me or lose me. So Spook was very interesting. We had a saying that it had the 3 big Pratt & Whitney engines, and it used to leak oil. And say if somebody reported, there's a leak on this engine, I say, well, if it's not leaking oil, it doesn't have oil. It's supposed to leak oil. But we had some instances where on a sortie, I would look out of the plane and there was a river of oil on the wing. And I would immediately report it to the flight coordinator, and he would report it to the air crew and say, the first response would be, if it doesn't leak oil, it doesn't have oil. And until they see it for themselves, no, we better get on the ground fast. There's a problem developing. And you would see this, land, and the whole flap is full of oil, and you could see there's something that went wrong with that Pratt & Whitney radial, so they had to replace that engine. But that was rare. It was planes coming to the end. A lot of planes in the Air Force at that stage was being decommissioned. I think it was a very sad day when your squadron's planes get decommissioned or replaced with something else or not. People really get attached to the planes. I understand that, people's career builds around some of these aircraft that we used to fly.
Would you say your job there was more passive in the sense of listening in, intercepting, or active when you're jamming something, or both?
In my experience, it was 99% passive listening and analyzing, and 1% was jamming. So jamming was quite rare. And jamming is also, the moment you go active with jamming, there's whole sorts of other rules that come into place and safety and things. But for the most, 99% of our flying time was passive listening, recording things as they happen.
I must say I have great faith in South African Air Force personnel, air crew, technicians, whoever. Great faith. But were you ever in a situation where you were wondering that, the aircraft might be going through fog, or at night, are you wondering if those 2 pilots are awake there up front?
No, not really. My experience has only been of a high level of professionalism, especially around the pilots. There was not one incident in my whole flying career where I said, that was not, how we do things. You just reminded me of a story. The one night we did a training sortie. The idea was to take off from Swartkops Air Force Base with a DC-4. And we had a double crew in the back. We did a training on all the systems in the back, and we had to train up more guys, more operators to be current on the aircraft. So we flew from, if you can imagine on the map now, if you look at the old Transvaal borders, we would fly from Swartkops to Skakuza and the Kruger National Park. And then you would fly up to where Mozambique and Zimbabwe got together at Pafuri. And then we would fly past Messina to Chikondeni on the Botswana side, and then you would fly down to Zeerust and then to Uppington, and then you would come back on that route. So we took off at about 8 o'clock at night, and this was going to be quite a long 4-hour plus training sortie. And that would give us a lot of airtime on the systems at night to really get 2 crews trained up. So everything went well and so on, but you know, as we got to Bafuri, right at the top, the Punda Malia Gate, the Kruger National Park, where Mozambique and Zimbabwe and South Africa comes together, the commander reported to the flight coordinator in the back of the plane that they had he decided, he made a call as the commander to go straight back to Swartkops because there was a fire warning on the #1 engine, but it was only the sensor. The engine was running a bit hot. It wasn't a real fire, but the fire warning was keep going off. And they could see, you could just look out the plane, there's no fire there, but you know, he just didn't want to take a chance. So he made the call as the commander that our safety is more important than to try and push through to do the whole sortie. So he immediately turned back to Swartkops, and you know, we were told switch off all the equipment and just go and relax, and we're flying back to Swartkops. And meanwhile, they got into the HF radio, and they radioed us back to the Swartkops ops room to say that you know, we got a fire warning on #1. And #1 engine is important because that's the one that provides the electricity also for the plane itself. So that one burns or have an issue, we may have an issue with the electricity in the plane as well. So the message went through, and there was this very young, inexperienced ops clerk in the operations room at Swartkops, and he got the message, you know, directly from the aircrew. And you know, now we were flying back, and we came into land at Swartkops, and this was now about 9:30 at night. And as we approached Swartkops, you could see that there was something going on the airbase. There were lights flashing everywhere. There was fire engines and ambulances, and there was Air Force police, and just everyone with a light on the roof of the vehicle was there. They were all around. We said, "What? Somebody must be in trouble," you know, and we better land and get out of the way. You know, there must be some other emergency happening there. So we land with the DC-4 at Swartkops, and we taxi to the hangar and switch off and so on. And as they switch off, the ground crew start bringing the stairs to the front door. And the first person up the stairs to the door is the officer commanding of the base. And he's carrying in each hand, you know, 6 beers. Yeah. And he gets into the plane, and he starts handing everyone a beer and so on and so on. And he says, "I'm so glad you guys are okay," and so on. And says, "Why? What's wrong?" He says, "No, the message they got from the ops room was that the commander says that #1 is burning, but he's bringing her back." You know, so the message was the plane is on fire, you know, but they're coming back. You know, so that's why this activated. It was quite funny afterwards, but you know, it was, you know, going through this experience, and I think that somebody had a serious talking to this guy to say, you know, if you act as a relay point for critical information like that, you better have your story straight, you know, because this now got a lot of people very worried, and actually quite funny at the end of the day, but quite interesting. But the main point of that story is that the commanders of the aircraft is responsible for every soul on that aircraft. And they make the call that's the best for the mission and for the crew, and they would never put people in harm's way. At one stage, there was, I remember one of the colonels at 28th Squadron was sent overseas to America to go and do a cockpit management course. And he came back and he delivered that course now to all the multi-crew cockpit crews in the Air Force, helicopter and transport aircraft. And that was all about how do you work with each other in a cockpit? You know, what language do you use? You know, if someone is flying and they're doing something that is maybe dangerous or stupid or whatever, it should be safe for anyone in that environment to voice, say, "Oh, you know, even if it's let's say a flight engineer, a sergeant sitting there between 2 senior officers flying the plane, you know, and one of them do something silly or something that makes him feel unsafe, he's got the right to say, maybe we're a bit low, or just Major, maybe we should rethink what you're doing there. It's safe for that person to do that, and it doesn't matter who you are. If it was encouraged to have that level of integrity in the cockpit to make sure that the right decisions are taken, that everyone feels safe on that mission, and that no stupid things happen. And that was very well managed. So I'm sure some things that happen, and I'm not saying every process is perfect, but in my experience, what I've seen is only professionalism of the highest standard, and people making the right calls at the right time, even though they were not popular sometimes. They made the right calls that always had the best outcome for everyone involved.
You people didn't have any parachutes there or anything on an aircraft like the Spook, it's a DC-4. I mean, how do you get out? You either land or you didn't, or did you have parachutes?
No, we did. In fact, part of our training was we had parachutes, and part of it, so one of the things is that if you wanted to fly on any squadron, and I'm not talking in the context of my experience with the electronic warfare planes, is that if you want to be current on that squadron, every month you have to write an emergency procedure test. So on every plane, there's probably 4 to 6 different sets of procedures in different emergencies. What do you do? And one of them is when you ditch in the sea, one of you ditch on the land, or do a crash landing on land. The other one is what do you do if you have to bail out over land or over sea? What do you do? And we also did, and I'll send you some pictures of this, some sea survival equipment orientation courses there in Simonstown in the harbour with the Navy, where they would just throw us, into the sea there in Simonstown, and then teach us how to work a 10-man dinghy and how to work the May Wests, and what do you do if you have to stay in cold water like that for a long time? What is your best way to survive, and all of that. It wasn't sea survival, it was orientation on the equipment. But in the planes also, there were stowed parachutes for every person, in case we had to bail out. Luckily, we never came close to any of that. We also had single-person dinghies, and we all were issued with a personal May West with all the emergency equipment and so on, and we were trained on all of it. So if something happened, you knew that every single person know the procedures, they know how to use the equipment, they've at least had some orientation with the Navy in the water, how to use all of that, so that you could operate it safely.
Yeah, I find that fascinating, because an Air Force is not a normal aircraft, is it? I mean, you people do fly safely, yes, but you also fly in a different way than, say, an aircraft of a civilian airline. But now I must ask you, Jacques, how do you feel getting into a civilian aircraft? Do you have the same level of confidence, or do you feel a bit apprehension here of just sitting like cattle there at the back? You've got no way to escape.
That's a good question, and I think the best way to answer that is that over the last 4 or 5 decades, especially, a lot of aircraft crashes where people may have lost their lives have led to major significant change in the aviation industry to make it safer and safer and safer. So aircraft crashes are getting more rare. So it's only when you break the rules, when you don't maintain the aircraft, when you've got significant pilot error for a specific reason that you run into issues. But one of our courses, there was a statistic like the risk of you getting into a commercial plane and crashing and dying is the risk is you have to fly for 15 years constantly without landing for that risk to eventuate. Now, no one does that. So it's so rare, especially nowadays, for aircraft like that. You can just hear, if you remember in the 70s and 80s, you often would hear about big aircraft crashes. And if you look at some of the TV channels would often have air crash investigation programs. But hardly ever nowadays you hear those stories. It's you have a highly regulated industry that have very high standards around the maintenance and the operation of the aircraft. You cannot afford to have insurance pay out every single time you have a crash. That's just not going to work. So I feel very safe when I fly. It's, I've never in my life, and I've flown quite a bit commercially as well, had a bad experience. There's no personal reason I see that you would feel any less safe. And a lot of those pilots either have military backgrounds, or have been trained by people with a military background, or are, so highly experienced. It's rare nowadays to see a pilot with less than 1,000 flying hours getting in a cockpit. I think we're at that point now of the technology and the processes and the people where it's a rare exception to have a aircraft crash.
Now, in the first episode, we spoke about the uniform, and we agreed sort of that the Navy guys had an unfair advantage, very unfair. But the Air Force was just below them. But of course, now air crew is something else. I mean, this is the elite of the Air Force. Yes, there's a lot of people who support them, and we honor them as well. I have never in my life seen an air crew without wearing the naval or the aviator glasses, because Ray-Bans themselves, even in the dark. Just a joke. Did you guys also got these Ray-Bans issued to you?
Well, you can argue that initially when the guys sign up, that's what they want. They want the leather jacket and the Ray-Ban glasses and so on. And I think there's definitely a bit of truth in it. You would attract some personalities that would, especially young guys, that they would like that type of image around them with the Ray-Bans. But for the most, there's a reason why you wear Ray-Bans. It's not there to look smart. It's there's a technical reason. Is to protect your eyes, because every year on your birthday you had to do a full flight medical in the Air Force, and if you failed any component of that medical, you were then removed from the roster to fly. So you basically lost your airworthiness. And so until you fix that or get advice how to solve that problem, you were not allowed to fly. So if you think of why the guys were wearing Ray-Bans, is to really protect your eyes. It's not a fashion statement. It wasn't there to really make you look any better or whatever. It was really there to protect your eyes, and your eyes are extremely valuable, especially as a air crew. So that's why we were issued with Ray-Bans in the Air Force. A lot of guys that didn't even bother wearing them. They felt it wasn't needed. Their eyes were good enough. But you always had it there, and I think you're definitely going to find some of those more extroverted personalities who just can't help themselves and they had to wear this at night as well. So there was, Air Force culture. There's this rivalry between different parts of any Air Force, and you would always hear these jokes about the pilots versus the logistics guys and so on. And I hope some of those pilots and air crew actually come on your channel and tell those stories, because there's some really amazingly funny stories in the South African Air Force aviation world of things that happened and was said, and I don't think any of those have been written down in books. But and some of those stories is around exactly this topic of fighter pilots being so important. And we used to joke, why do fighter pilots wear glow in the dark gloves? This is when, in a case where the lights in the pub goes out, they can still tell their stories, and there we were, flying like this and so on, and you can still see with the gloves at night, how they were flying the aerial combat maneuvers. And it was just one of those standing jokes and so on. But, and that was great about the Air Force. It was that great history, that sense of humor that is part of the Air Force culture during the time that I was there.
Well, it's a standing invitation to everybody. These people who wrote the books, Mossy, all those people, if you're listening here, you're all welcome here. You're all welcome here. Just contact me. But I will tell you, I've heard a story about fighter pilots. I might regret saying this, but their definition of foreplay is 4 hours of non-stop begging. And after that, I offer a little compensation to a woman. I'm just joking. I don't really mean that. But it seems to me that this aircrew was close to each other, very much like a brotherhood. May I use that word? I know there were females also. A brotherhood of people with you're a crew, this is your aircraft, man, you're just the best, you're better than those guys with the same aircraft, you know, right next door. Was that true? Did you have that esprit de corps?
Yeah, definitely, and I think that differed once again from squadron to squadron and from context to context. Often people are bound together by the same purpose, but my experience was that if you were not a very sociable person who got along with other people, you would not last long in the Air Force. You had to really be a people's person and have a bit of an affinity for other people to get along with them and work with them. And some of those squadrons, the teams and the teamwork was so close that it actually contributed to the success of the mission of that squadron or that aircraft. That was really my experience, is that guys who were used to operating in a single-seater cockpit had to almost adapt to a multi-person cockpit very fast if they wanted to fit in. And because you've got to operate as a team, and you've got to be professional as a team, because things can go wrong at any stage. It's not always fun and games. It's you've got to be a real professional person in a professional environment to make sure that you operate that aircraft in a safe manner, and that everyone goes home safely that night.
Well, I have to say, if we don't stop here, we're going to carry on and on and on. But it's now 1:30 in the morning there in New Zealand, and I don't want to be accused of keeping a man away from his wife. So, and perhaps more importantly, my own wife, Rebecca, now wants to use the studio so we can be kicked out here. I have to say to you, Jacques, thank you very much. This is bringing us an insight in a world which few people know. I think it's valuable. I think it's very, very valuable to know how the Air Force operated and what the Air Force did. And without your insights, there's no way in the world we would know. So thank you for that. Thank you for your time, for staying up. As I always say to all of you here, you know the story by now. You were important. Don't let these people tell you you were just a little, spanner somewhere or whatever, or just a national serviceman or whatever. Don't tell me such crap. You were important. You contributed. You did your duty. You should be proud. Come and talk to us. Come and tell us your story. Even if I record you only next year or 6 months from now, it doesn't matter. Get yourself in the line, because other people are getting into line as well. Until we meet again, God bless.